And I think mentoring to fit in can work, and that's fine if that's what people want and that's how they're going to survive. But I don't know if it helps you thrive. And it's not about being a woman or a man. It's just how you show up and how you want to be, right? Whether you want to be feminine or masculine or whatever that is. It's really about that. And just understanding people from their perspective, not enforcing yours.
Welcome to Great Conversations with Nicola O'Donoghue, the podcast where everyday individuals share their extraordinary stories of struggle, success, and the wisdom they found along the way. This week, I'm joined by Mandy Grewal, a trailblazer and CEO of At Room Women's Network. On her path to success, Mandy confronted the challenges of racism and gender bias head on. What truly resonates is her unwavering commitment to her self-belief and identity, and her steadfast refusal to compromise her values in order to fit in. Her journey is a testament to Mandy's inner strength and conviction in her own worth and ability. What I personally found so striking about Mandy's story is her infectious optimism, which effortlessly outshines negativity. Her remarkable success speaks volumes, serving as an inspiring example of embracing a growth mindset, finding common ground in our diversity, and nurturing the individual greatness within each of us. I hope you enjoy Mandy's remarkable journey, gain insights into the importance of authenticity and mentorship, and tap into her empowering perspective on life as a guiding light for your own path to greatness. Mandy Grewal, welcome to Great Conversations. How are you today?
I'm good, and thank you for having me. I'm so excited to chat with you, Nicola.
We start off our podcast now with a question that the previous guest has left. So, Mandy, your question is, if you had Aladdin's genie, what would your wish be and why?
Oh,
I know.
You know what? There's so many things that I think you can wish for, but I don't know. There's maybe a couple that I think I could flip between, but one would possibly be that there be no physical violence in this world. Just no physical contact in a violent way between two people, because I think that's just, I don't know, I think it leads to a lot of these issues of world peace and beliefs and everything else. And I just think there's no need to go to that point. And I think, if people kind of worked on themselves and figured out their path through. So I think it ties into a lot of things. It's hard to say what's that one thing. But good question. Really makes you think, right? What it would be.
It does. And what would younger Mandy have said to that question, do you think? How would she have answered it?
I think when you're younger, you fall into the narrative of the world. So you kind of go through world peace and all that stuff. I mean, as a child, I wanted to be a diplomat because I just thought conflict could be resolved without so much violence. It's coming to a middle ground on beliefs, right? But I don't know, maybe younger Mandy might have been a bit more like, oh, I want this or I want that. I think your aspirations are different when you're younger than as you get older, probably.
But there's still a commonality there, though, which is what I'm hearing about being able to resolve and come to a collaborative solution without having to resort to violence. I'm just really curious, that belief and that frame of reference, where did it come from?
So I'm the first child in my family, born in England. My parents are immigrants from India. And it was an interesting upbringing for me in the sense that, I grew up in an environment that even my parents weren't familiar with. And they were trying to figure their way through it, and my grandparents. And so you grow up in this middle world, I think, as the child of an immigrant, where your parents and your grandparents have those values they've brought with them from another country. And then you're growing up in this environment that's new to them, but you're born there. And then I think the other piece for me in that was, I'm light-skinned, green-eyed, and I felt for a lot of my childhood, I didn't fit in sometimes either way. I, from a heritage perspective, ethnicity wise, being Sikh, people would look at me and think, well, you're lighter skinned, you're green eyed, you're one of them, like you're more on the white side, especially when you're trying to integrate into a community and fit in at school and all that stuff. And then in the environment I grew up in with England, from a whiteness perspective, people would be like, well, you're not quite white. You've got a little bit of something. And so, you're something else, and trying to figure out what that is. And so I feel like in some ways I grew up in that middle ground. And when you grow up in that middle ground, you have two kind of things that you strongly identify with, being Sikh and being British. And I think part of it for me was trying to reconcile the two into who I am. When you don't fit in either way, and then it also became, how do I help one side see the other side? How do I help integration? How do I, and I'm that person, which is maybe why I answered the question about, the genie with violence, is I just think that, we can all get to what we want. It's just having kind of this little bit of give and take of understanding what somebody else is giving, what you're taking, and what you're giving back, right? I think everything has that flow and that balance back and forth. And how do you really take that and become a melting pot to bring those two views together, but in a way that's, I guess, good for the world. And I think the other side of it is too, when I think about it, is that I did encounter a lot of racism, even though I encountered a lot of racism, but I didn't take the view of, taking that in. I kind of became more curious. Like, why do you think that? You don't know me. Why do you have an opinion about me without knowing me? How do you have an opinion about me without knowing me? Right. So I think there's a lot of those little pieces that came into it. And then I just started thinking that there's just better ways to resolve conflict sometimes.
And it's just, wow, there's so much there. I mean, I can understand. I felt as if when you were talking, this standing in the middle ground and just not being seen, and then this desire to be seen by all parties, and understood as well. And I just, not to drag up and go into past childhood trauma, and I'm just genuinely so curious. Like, you've referred to, the racism and not fitting in, but how was that? Like, talk to me about your childhood and how you navigated that. Like, what was it like growing up for you? And
that's an interesting point, Nicola. And not something I think I've ever thought of or heard before, but like, now that you say it, I just think that a lot of my childhood was very opposing things. Very young, my nursery school were doing part of the floats for the Queen's Jubilee in England. So they shut down the streets, and they were doing this kind of parade through the streets. And my sister had just been born. My mom was really busy. So my teacher asked, can I help her? And if I get her an outfit and get it all done, can she be on these floats? And so it's that for me, where you are a certain color, you don't quite fit in, but you're given an opportunity to fit in. I'm on these parades, waving to people, going through the streets when I'm very, very young. Like I said, it was nursery school. And it's like this conflicting kind of experiences that you have that start to form your identity to in that way, right? You've got this racism, but then you have these crazy experiences that tell you you're someone, that make you feel special, that make you feel that you can have anything. And I think it's interesting what you do with those experiences, and how you kind of internalize them. And we're all different. We all react to things differently. And for me, the racism was hard, because I felt like the racism was crushing me and telling me I couldn't be who I wanted to be. But then I also had these strong affirmations in my life that were telling me I could be anything. So in some ways, it's almost like, I don't know, rising against the tide, right? Mm-hmm. Like you're really fighting against the tide to say, I am someone. I have the right to be here. I have the right to make my mark. I have the right to have what I want. but then on the other side, it's like, yeah, you're not quite good enough. You're not quite at the top, right? So it's an interesting kind of experience to go through.
Yeah. And it's what you're sharing is my Micheline, she on one of the previous guests on one of the podcasts, she shared very similar experience of growing up as a black woman and being told by the systems around her and the racist society when she moved to the US that she was less than. But then her home and her family were very much about, you can be whatever you want to be, you know, you study hard and the world is yours for the taking. And so she spoke about how she had that anchor that really helped her navigate what was going on externally in terms of the racism and the microaggressions she was experiencing on a daily basis. And so one of the things that I would love to understand from you is what were your anchors? Like, how did you navigate that? What are some of the things that really helped you, I guess, navigate, but also find out your identity for yourself?
You know what? I think it's two things, and I've started to realize this more and more. One is somebody, and maybe not physically, but somebody opening a door or making room for you to show up. The teacher in that instance was an Indian teacher too. So she probably looked at me and thought, you know, there's some familiarity there and I want to help her. So there's making room for people to show up and allowing them to kind of come in through the cracks. There is that bit of conformity to say you have to do this to fit in, but then there's also that safe space that you can give people to say, well, I'm going to give you some space to come in. And that's how we really start to move things. And I think the other one is validation on your beliefs. I don't know. I haven't looked into this from a psychology perspective. It's just something that, you know, has been mulling around in my head. But it's this thing of, you know, if a child up until the age of 5 is given positive affirmations on who they are, and that's all they're given. They're not told what they can't do. They're not told, you know, don't do this, don't do that, but they're told, you know, you are smart, you are bright, you're going to be something, you can have anything you want. I think for me, I had a lot of that when I was younger, again, because I think I was the first child. So I feel like hopes and dreams were pinned on me in some way to say, you know, you can get the education you want. And, you know, my grandparents couldn't read or write. And so to them, my granddad would always say to me is that, you know, education is key because then you can read and write what you're signing, for example. You have your destiny in your hands. You can control it if you're educated. So it was always key. And I think that piece for me, as I progressed in life, I would show up very strong in who I am. And I think throughout that process, I would get validation here and there. It's still very difficult. Like very early on in my career, one of my entry-level roles, I'd interviewed with a director and I was an entry-level role. And for me, it was like, oh my God, she's an executive, you know, and that in awe of. And I remember at the end of the interview, she said to me, she said, I just want you to know, whether you work here or not, you're really going to go far. You're really going to do well, and wherever that is. And something as simple as that, when I walked away, I was on cloud 9. I did get the job, but it wasn't about the job anymore. It was the fact that she'd said that, and it held me, it anchored me for a very long time. Let anything happened or anything I felt, I would remember what she'd said, and it became kind of this thing of like, someone saw that in me, so it exists in me.
And then how did that carry you through your teenage years and into university? Where did that grounding take you?
Those years, I think, became more difficult to a certain extent because as you start to get older and you start to move into adulthood, I think those were the years where I faced racism the most. I just think as a child, it's not that you're dismissed, but you're a child. But I think as you start to move into adulthood, you start to become a force in this world that people feel can have impact, maybe. I don't know. But that was where I started to feel, you know, the racism more. I started to actually, I feel like I started to withdraw. I would turn up in class. We lived in a predominantly white neighborhood at that time. And I would turn up at class try and sit at the back of the room and try not breathe, but you'd even be afraid to take a breath because it just felt like that if I was seen, then I'd be picked on. And so I would be very quiet. I'd stay out the way, do my work, and it was funny because a lot of my teachers were like, wow, like, if your work is great. And so they would really encourage me. So I still had those validations. But it's very hard when you're trying to navigate environments where, you just feel so much, I don't even know if it's hate. You just feel like you don't fit in, right? That's hard to maneuver through at that age, I think, especially as you're trying to figure out who you are.
Yeah, exactly. And I can imagine it must have felt really unsafe as well. Just, very isolating and by yourself and unsafe. So what were some of the things that helped you navigate through that?
We had a mixture of people, even in the neighborhood. We had people that were like, why do you live here? And then we had people that were welcoming. And so I gravitated towards the people that were welcoming. I tried to build that more and more in my social life. I just tried to find people that were more accepting, that were willing to be friends or understand you, or and even at school, I had one great friend. Her name was Julie, and she would really stick up for me, and she would really stand up and say, don't pick on her, don't say anything, right? And she'd really show up in a very strong way for me. And so again, I think I gravitated to those people that wanted to help. I gravitated to those that did want to kind of evolve their views. I'd get a lot of people say to me when they'd get to know me is, you know what, you're really not that different from us. I'd hear that a lot. Is as I've got to know you, you're really not that different from us. And then you kind of go through, am I changing to fit in, or are they really accepting me for who I am? Right.
Well, I was going to say that it's in itself, it's a backhanded compliment, isn't it? It's a microaggression of, still seeped in racism because it's still otherizing. I would love for you to share more about your journey for discovering who you are. What did that look like?
So my journey in discovering who I am has been, it's really interesting, I think, for me. It's been untangling my beliefs. And what I mean by that is, like I said, when we grow up, we're taught what to believe to a certain degree, right? Whether it's through culture, religion, politics, school. And an example of it is, you can have a belief system that I should get married and I should have kids, or you can have a belief system that I need to go to school and university and then I need to become a doctor. But there's all these beliefs that we are given. And I think the journey for me has been untangling those beliefs, and which serve me and help me serve other people, and which ones actually kind of detract from who I am and lead me down this path of looking at myself and thinking, that's not who I want to be. That's not who I am. That's not who I like. And, and I think part of that also for me has been, and especially in my career, is I find myself working with people or in companies or situations, and I really pay attention to how I feel about it. Am I feeling good? Am I feeling impactful? Am I feeling like, this is aligning with who I am and my values? Or do I feel like I'm doing this like a hamster on a wheel?
I'm really curious though, this what you speak of is such a huge awakening and very insightful and very conscious and self-aware. So how did you come to that? Was there something that, because I'm assuming that this philosophy that you talk of and untangling your beliefs, you were already doing that process before the pandemic hit. So what was your trajectory and your route to actually get to that point in your life where you suddenly, or not suddenly, but where you came to this awareness of, hold on a minute, I need to look at what's driving me here?
I'm an impactful person, I think, or like I think that way is, how do my actions impact myself and others, and what are they leading me to? And what does that look like, right? How do you navigate from where you are to where you want to be? And again, I think that goes back to my childhood. As a child, my dad would drive from like central England to London, and he would sit me in the passenger seat and give me this paper map. back then you have those big maps so he'd give me one of those paper maps and he'd be like, here's where we're going. Tell me how to get there. So I'd open up this map and I would figure out all these routes to get there. Okay, we got to go turn here, turn there, do this. So I did that so much that I feel like it's a habit. It just trained me in a certain way, especially because I was so young at the time. And I think a lot of my life and my career, especially from the beginning, has been, what do I want to do? Who I am? Who am I? How does this really contribute to who I am? And I think even entry level, even when I worked in retail, a lot of my jobs, I've often thought, do I really want to do this? Do I like doing this? And how is it contributing to me learning and growing? It's been a journey, at least for the last decade, to be honest, because I don't think you come to it overnight. But you start to, again, reading and the people you surround yourself with, and you really start to figure out and move through, like, how do I get to what I want? And I think what I started to realize is that sometimes what we do and what we want can be in conflict. Sometimes what we believe and what we want is in conflict. And so I just started to find quiet space. And I think a lot of it's been through meditation. A lot of it has been through, just things like that to really stop the noise in your head. I don't know if you've read The Untethered Soul.
Yes, I have.
That's an amazing book.
It is.
And I think that was one of those first pieces for me that I started to realize, whoa, like my thoughts are actually running by themselves and they're not me, right? I started to, that's that moment of like, not detachment, but you start to think, well, hang on, my thoughts do run kind of like on their own. And then you start to, when you become conscious of that, then you become conscious of like, well, hang on, what are my beliefs? And are they serving me? Are they serving other people? If this is what I say I want to do, how is this kind of working? And so I think in that journey, it's, I don't know, I think it's dynamic, isn't it? It's just, it's ever evolving. Right? Like
it is.
How you untangle that.
It is. And throughout it all, I just hear this, this real grounding and self-belief, like a real sense of self-trust. And because it takes a lot of confidence to be able to not only open yourself up to those questions, but to do the work around, what are my thoughts? What do I believe? How that's impacting me? Like even what you're talking about with the, being able to understand that what you want and what you do can sometimes be in conflict. In order to be able to be mindful and aware of that, you have to be very connected and grounded in who you are and connected to your body. So was that something that was always present as a child? Because that's what I'm really curious about. The middle ground within which you inhabited as you were navigating your childhood and then early adulthood, it fascinates me that you were able to still have that anchor and that belief in who you were despite what was going on externally. Or is this something that you came to a little bit later and actually?
You know what? I've been thinking about this quite a bit lately, I think, in that because I don't know how to explain it to people, but what I do know is that no matter what happens, no matter what's going on, I feel like I will magnetically come back to this point of who I am and calmness. And so I always feel that it's not about not making mistakes, but I want to wake up every day and be better than yesterday. I want to be a good person. The reason I say I want to be a good person, because I think, do you ever get there? Like there's this constant evolution because we're navigating so many people around us too. And like I said, everything's ever changing. And so I kind of think that how am I better today than yesterday? How do I have impact where I, help my life progress forward, but I help those around me? Because I don't want to just succeed on my own. I don't want to just be the person on the podium that's like, look at me. I want everybody to be there on their terms, right? And so I think a lot of it did come from, I grew up in a lot of turmoil. And I grew up, my family kind of fought a lot. They fell out. I lost a lot of people I love. So I went through a lot of that. And so I think from an early childhood, again, despite everything going on, I was always told from a very young age, you're going to be something. You can be something. The world is yours to take. You can do whatever you want. You can, be whatever you want. And like I said, it was my teen years and my early adulthood where all of a sudden I started to feel more and more like, oh, no, you can't do that. No, you can't be that. But I think those young years, set a foundation that's just, I don't know, I think overrides everything later, no matter what that is.
Yeah.
And so I just have that very strong belief. And like I said, magnetically, I think it just brings me back to that all the time, that I'm going to be okay, and I'm going to figure this out. And I'm always excited by that.
You mentioned it earlier, you used the word curiosity. And that's, it feels to me like not only are you really grounded in a deep knowing, self-knowing and self-belief, but you also go into the world with a really curious and growth-oriented mindset. And you mentioned it earlier as well about, the people that you built relationships with and the friendships and the group around you of also like-minded people that want to get to know and want to learn and want to, sort of keep moving forward and growing. And I find that really, really interesting. Clearly, that's a huge part of how you're going into the world. So tell me just to fill in some of the gaps. So career-wise, what's your route been? What have you done? Where are you now? Like, how are you bringing that mindset and opening doors for others, being curious, growth, clearly wanting to have an impact? How are you bringing that into your career?
So interesting. The two go hand in hand, the curiosity side. I am curious because I want to learn. I feel like I'm forever the student, and I want to learn. I mean, during my school days and high school and whatever, I've had this curiosity to understand people. And again, I think it goes back into that middle ground. I've read an English translation of the Quran during school, right? Like you were taught about Christianity and all that. It was just how it was at that time. Sikhism, Hinduism. There's a lot of these religions, and even from a political standpoint, I've always been curious, like, oh, interesting. Somebody thinks that, and then this happens, or this is their belief system, and this is how it shows up in the world. I'm curious about that. I'm curious what people believe, and then how that thought really shows up in this world.
And I also think, sorry to interrupt, I also feel as if adding on to that is you're curious about what the commonality is between that. I feel like there's something really strong of, there's more that unites us. There's more that you said it earlier. There's more that makes us similar than different. And I wonder if that's also a part of it as well, is
a big part
those
of
commonalities. It. Yeah.
A big part of it, because I think sometimes, look, there's these different sides of like, you want to integrate, but you want to remain whole as you are. And I think that's interesting. Like, I've been to a Nigerian wedding and I found it so interesting. It was a Nigerian Filipino wedding. So interesting to see the two cultures come together. Like, it was probably one of the, I don't know, like just an amazing wedding. I have a South Indian friend who is doing a sari ceremony for her daughter. Again, just so interesting, right? Bar mitzvahs. Like, I'm curious about all that, because I just think that everything has a level of a spark of greatness that you could be like, oh my God, like how amazing is that you could really appreciate all that stuff. That makes everybody who they are, that makes, different religions function the way they do. I just think everything has some level of greatness that I want to learn more about, and how do I incorporate that into my life?
And I love what you're saying, because I also feel as if, the prevailing mindset for many is independence. And I feel as if there's much more strength in the interdependencies, as you say, taking the greatness that's inherent in everybody and bringing them together, and then together from that basis, going out into the world and creating something that's truly phenomenal or powerful. This, what you're saying is really resonating for me.
Yeah, and it's a combination. It's that we're all connected from a spirituality perspective. We talk about the fact that we're all connected, right? So again, this goes back to that flow back and forth. We're all connected. We're here to learn and grow. How do I take that? And then how do I bring it back to myself? Because there is only you, right? So how does that go back and forth in a meaningful and productive way? And I think for me, my career was very, very similar. In that it was about, my career spans many different industries, I think, from finance to tech to marketing. Tech has been a huge part of it. But what I started to realize is from that curiosity standpoint, from that collaboration perspective, that really a lot of my career has been about going into companies, understanding what they want and helping them get there. Title role has been important to me to a certain degree, but when I hit like CEO and some of those, I was just like, now what, right? Like the curiosity still continued. But I think for me right now, where I really feel a calling, I guess, more and more is helping women specifically. But then just helping people succeed, helping people find, and especially women. And the reason I say women is because I have encountered that throughout my career from a gender perspective where I don't know if I've paid attention to the blocks because, again, my personality was, I don't care whether you think I can be someone or not. I don't care whether you think I should be here or not. I'm going to be here and I'm going to contribute in a productive and meaningful way. And I'm going to show you results based on that, right? So I've navigated my career that way, but it's not always easy. It's not always how you want to show up. And I always, say to the people, just because you can fight doesn't mean you should have to. And so I want to create room and I want to create space for women to really succeed because I just think the world needs it. I think companies need it. I think, that balance and equality is important. Because people do function in different ways. So again, this goes back to that middle ground for me that if we want to really thrive as a human race, then there has to be give and take. There has to be room for everybody to show up and really contribute, as their greatness and not be held down.
Yeah. And what are some of the lessons, wisdom, skills that you want to impart to the women that you're working with, that you're empowering in order to help them achieve that goal?
Do you know what? I think it's really important to understand who they are and how they want to navigate this world because if you start with you and what you think you want to do, sometimes that can actually be a hindrance to the other person because they don't think like you. They're not you. They don't have your childhood or your background. Like sometimes for me, it can be like, well, who cares? Just do it or just move, right? That can be like me, but they might not might not resonate with them. So I just feel like if I really do want to help women power forward in their careers or just their lives, I think what it starts with for me is understanding them, understanding their journey, because we can be judgmental. We can be very judgmental too, right? And so it's removing that judgment piece too, to say, I'm not here to tell you what I think. I'm here to understand what it is you want. I'm here to understand what it is you want to bring to life. I'm here to understand how you want to show up in this world. And then help them figure out the steps and path that because I think if they do something that naturally aligns with them and something that really makes them feel good, they're going to come back tomorrow and say, I want more. What else can I do? Otherwise, it's just, you end up with friction again because you're forcing someone to be something they're not. And I think I learned that through my career where I started to realize early on that when I was being mentored or going through those stages, I wanted to be mentored to be more of who I am, not to fit in.
Yeah.
And I think mentoring to fit in can work, and that's fine if that's what people want and that's how they're going to survive. But I don't know if it helps you thrive. And it's not about being a woman or a man. It's just how you show up and how you want to be, right? Whether you want to be feminine or masculine or whatever that is. It's really about that. And just understanding people from their perspective, not enforcing yours.
Yeah, and you're talking for me of a quality of leadership that's often really overlooked, because, and I think that does play up in when we have mentors, of the telling, because oftentimes leaders have this assumption that they must lead from the front, they must have all of the answers, and then they must role model. So like you're saying, when then they show up in mentoring roles, it's very much a tell and pushing people into the box, because they're just creating mini me's. And
Yes.
what you're talking about is a dimension of leadership, which is being in service of. It sounds like it's twofold. It's a partnership. So you're alongside this person, getting to know them, giving them space to discover who they are. And then you're subtly taking a little step back and then leading from behind, and then being there to sort of help and encourage them as they grow into their own greatness. And it's such a beautiful model and representation of the leadership that we very much need in this world.
Oh, thank you. And you know what? I think for me, part of it is own your growth. Everybody should own themselves and their growth. And you are the only person who knows what that is. And somebody else can help you uncover it. They can help you nudge you. But I think, owning your growth is so key if you really want to progress, right?
Yeah.
Because, otherwise, you are going to become a mini me of somebody else. Otherwise, you are going to just, be what somebody else is. And then, like I said, you're going to find 10 years, 5 years, whatever that is down the line, that you start to actually have you're in conflict inside, because you're like, well, I'm being told to do this and now I need to do it because they've said it, and I'm in, I don't really want to do it. And like, it becomes very wobbly like that. And then I also think there's dependency then. You actually become dependent on that person, and their thinking and how they would get out of a situation. You don't really learn to think for yourself. I've actually been very strong on that, I find.
Yeah. And what you're talking to is such a courageous way of turning up in the world. Because when you think about it, from a very young age, we are bombarded with stories and role models and images of what it means to be successful, or what's expected of us. You're told to be a good girl, and how to behave, and so you're given these messages, and then as you go through the education system, you end up in a workplace. It's exactly the same as you say. There's often lots of messages of, in order to succeed and to fit in here, you have to show up and behave in a certain way, and it can be really difficult to find the courage and the space that you talk about to go, hold on a minute, who am I? What works for me? How do I want to be? How can I chart my own path and way in the world? And it is a really, for me anyway, a very courageous decision to make. And I love what you're saying, because I fundamentally agree. And it's my approach of, my journey is not going to be your journey. We are very different. My role is to guide and support and help. It's not to tell. And I think that there still are roles and there still are companies where there is that inflexibility, where there's a lot of pressure on working mums who, maybe the household is reliant on their salary, they have to work, and there's an inflexibility, but they're going through this, I guess, crisis of self. The job that they're doing is taking more than it's giving. They're racked with mum guilt, and there's just a lot of pressure. And I'm really interested, what would your advice be for those women that are trying to navigate that want to step more into what we've been talking about, of owning their voice and their power and creating a life that works better for them, but where they are currently and where they find themselves are, I guess, stuck?
Well, I think you've got to figure out what works for you. Some people can bear it and they think that is what they want. And others are like, well, no, this isn't going to work for me. But I think having a plan is usually a good idea. And what I mean by that is, you might be stuck now and you might be somewhere that is not helping you advance. But where do you want to be in a year or two? Are you still going to be stuck there a year later? And if so, you have to kind of look at that and think, well, okay, what are the deal breakers? I've had those where, okay, A, B, and C. And if this doesn't happen, then I will find something else. Or the only constant for me has been me and what I want. And I think that's where loyalty has to be to you. Because sometimes we're like, well, they need me, I'll stay. And I just think there's a lot of different reasons, but I think you have to have some sort of plan where, okay, in a year or two, this is where I want to be. Am I going to get there here, or am I going to get there somewhere else?
And I love, and even just how you're talking, and it's like self-empowerment and taking accountability, isn't it? Because, have a plan. Like there has to be some form of momentum. Often some of the feedback that I get from individuals or women in the type of situation that we've just chatted about is, I don't have time. Like I literally, I don't even have a minute to myself. And I am not discounting that at all. And my sort of challenge back is, so what? As in, like, so what next then? Is this going to be your life forever? Like, if you want to make a change, you have to start somewhere. And I keep, like, actually the Atomic Habit and what you said with James Clear, that 1%, it's just what's that 1% that you can do today, that you can do tomorrow, that's going to move you towards exactly what you said, where you want to be. So it's not necessarily about, resigning and quitting your job or having, unfortunately burning out or whatever it is. You don't have to hit the wall. And so often we do. So often we don't make a change until something catastrophic happens, and then we're forced into it. And actually, how can you take a step back from that and start planning? And for me, it's all about forward momentum.
Yes.
When you're moving, it's amazing how much progress you can make just from those teeny tiny things that you do day in, day out, that are getting you towards where you want to be. And I feel like, in order to do that, though, not only do you need to have a vision for your life of where you want to go, I feel like you also have to have a level of self-worth, that you deserve, like really fundamentally believing that you deserve better. And then the accountability and the ownership of, well, because we're all the authors of our life. And it sounds really trite, but it's true. Like what you said about your beliefs and your thoughts, we get to decide what our life looks like. We get to decide who we're in relationship with and how we're showing up. And so at some point you have to take responsibility for that. And it can be really overwhelming, but if you just focus on putting one foot in front of the other, you'll be amazed at how quickly you get to where you are. And I love what you're saying also about support, because you don't have to do it alone either.
Yeah, no, you know what, that 1%, I'll give you an example of it. And we've talked about it a bit, is that my son, I had him in summer school. So I drop him off at school. And when I drop him off at school, I had all this I felt like dead time driving home, where, okay, I can listen to music, but when you're doing it day in, day out, you're like, okay, I've got this time. And I started to do the audiobooks. And that's how I first came across The Untethered Soul. So I'd be driving along, and I thought, you know what, because I kept thinking, I want to read this book. And then I thought, the commitment to sit and read was just big for me at that time, and finding that space to do it. And I felt like the mind space to read, where as I was driving and you're listening to it, it changed so much for me, the book, but even audiobook. So, downtown can be anywhere between 30 minutes to an hour drive here one way. I found a little crack in my day or my week where I was now letting something in that I felt was really helping me kind of in that forward momentum to get to where I want to, because it isn't always easy. Yeah. It's very difficult to be where you are and think of, okay, where do I want to go? And what's that one thing I should start with? How do I really compound habits? Where do I start? Yeah. And so just something as simple as that. It was a 30-minute drive, but just I would look forward to it and think, okay, what's the next piece of this book now? And I just found it just did so much for me. So it doesn't always have to be. I think we overcomplicate things.
We definitely do
on those. Yeah.
And I agree. I think sometimes it's even we don't start because we're so sort of stuck in, well, where is the right place to start? And it doesn't matter. It's like literally going back to the point I made earlier about interconnectedness. It's all interconnected. It doesn't matter. like whatever you do is no matter what you do or what action you take, however small it may be, that is testament right there and then to the person you're becoming, to changing your life, to wanting more for your life. That's all that matters.
Yes.
It's amazing what momentum comes when you're willing to start. Just dip your tiny toe or finger in, and then it's amazing what comes from that.
Oh, absolutely. And I was telling someone, I was at an event last night and I was telling someone this, and it kind of made me think, we were talking about my career and all that, but anything. One thing I do quite consciously is, this goes back to that self-awareness and self-ownership, is I pay attention to what it is I'm putting out. What's the action? What's the intention? What's the action? What am I putting out? And then like a boomerang, I see what comes back. So I do this comes back. I do this comes back, right? And I start paying attention to that. And I was telling someone last night, and I said, because they were asking me about my career, and I said, do you know what? My career's an odd one to some degree, because I've got experience that's in many different industries. But again, it goes back to the belief system. Sometimes we're on this hamster wheel in this one industry and we think we have to stay there. And we don't necessarily think, well, I can take these skills and move here or move there based on what I want. And so I was telling her, and I said, you know what, through my career, what I do is when I talk to people, when I network, I tell them what I want. I tell them what I do, but I tell them what I do in a way that's, based on what I want. Well, this is what I do. This is who I am. And this is what I'd love to do and be. And this is, my future projection. And I said, and it's really interesting when people come back to you and say, hey, I want to introduce you to so-and-so because I heard you say that last night. And, this person could really be, great for you to talk to. And for me, I'm always excited about that. I'm always excited about putting out my ambitions and my intentions like that. Because the other side of it is sometimes you can get checked in and say, well, maybe that's not what I want to do. Maybe that's not the path that I want to go, because I really don't like that. Yeah. It's really interesting to see what comes back at you.
Wow. I'm going to start doing that. Mandy, that is so inspiring.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, what am I manifesting? I'm so inspired by that. Thank you for sharing. So we actually have a closing tradition on this podcast. I ask all of my guests, what is something that other people value that you don't?
It's not that I don't value other people's opinions. I do. But I don't value negative opinions. I take constructive feedback, and I'm always open to that. I actually love feedback. And because I want to know how to be better and how to kind of be part of a community where I can contribute. But I just don't value people trying to put me down. And I'm not saying other people do, but sometimes, like I said, you can get caught up in that more than what you believe about yourself.
Yeah.
So I just don't think somebody else has the right to tell me what I should believe about myself or if I have limitations.
Do you remember that song that Christina Aguilera and Lil' Kim did, like years gone by, Can't Hold Us Down? Yeah. As you were talking, this is just like boom in my head. Feels like it should be your theme tune, or maybe I need to look again at the lyrics, but just even, it's like, wow. And thank you so much. Thank you for our conversation. It's been absolutely awesome. I've come away with so many ideas on how I'm going to bring even more of my greatness into the world. So thank you. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. And thank you for having me on. So appreciative.
Thank you to the amazing individuals who make great conversations possible. My editor, Stian Moritz, musician Jamie Jenkin, and our incredible guests for their openness. Our website, integrate.net, will be launching in September with loads of other exciting resources. In the meantime, feel free to click the links below for more episodes of great conversations. Sending you so much love. Bye for now.